Okay, for the folks online, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us? Yeah. Two thumbs up. Okay. We will go ahead and get started then. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. This is our final Tides and Talks of the season. So we do our two series of the year, our spring series and then our fall series. Today is going to be our final series of the spring, which is about Econfina Creek and the springs. And then we're going to take a break for the summer. So if you have any topic suggestions for our upcoming fall series, please let us know. If you're online, drop a comment. Or we also have a suggestion box in the back. You're welcome to put your suggestions in, or just come talk to one of the estuary program staff, myself, or any of those ladies at the back there if you have any ideas. And today we are hearing from Dr. Paul Thurman and John Crow of the Northwest Florida Water Management District, and they're going to talk to us about management in the Econfina Creek Basin. So without further ado, I believe Paul was going to start us off.
Yep.
Awesome. Come on up. Set to presenter views. You just go through the slides, the buttons here, or you can just have it over. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Paul Thurman. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Water Resource Evaluation Group at Northwest Florida Water Management District. My group is in charge of primarily what we call the technical evaluations that we do for our water resources throughout the Panhandle. Yeah.
Louder.
Oh, louder? Okay, thank you. So my group does the technical analysis for a lot of our water resources that we have in Northwest Florida. We do minimum flows, we build the models, we look at groundwater, surface water, springs, bays, you name it, we do quite a bit of it. I am what we call an eco-hydrologist by trade. So I'm an aquatic ecologist, but my area of expertise is how communities and ecosystems respond to changes in hydrology. So it's, again, aquatic ecology, how everything works with changes in flows, salinity, water quality, water levels, all of that type of stuff. My portion of this talk is going to be about 20 minutes in there. Because it's relatively short, I think John's is probably going to be about the same length. If you have any questions about anything I'm talking about, please raise your hand and let me know, and we can talk about them right then so we don't get all the way to the end and forget where we were, what we're talking about. So let's keep it as casual as we can. Okay, so overall, what we're going to talk about today is I'm going to start things off, and I'm going to start off with a couple slides about who we are at the Northwest Florida Water Management District. A lot of people don't know who we are, where we are, what we do. Then we're going to move in and start talking about Econfina Creek specifically. We'll talk a little bit about the Econfina Creek watershed and the creek itself. Then I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about our minimum flows and levels program and the evaluation that we recently did on the Econfina Creek, specifically the middle Econfina Creek, which includes Gaynor Springs, Sylvan, and Williford Springs groups. I'm then going to pass it off over to John. He's going to talk about storm debris removal and restoration from Hurricane Michael, and then move into recreation and a little bit about our lands management and reforestation efforts that we're doing on some of our publicly managed properties up in the watershed. So as I said, we are Northwest Florida Water Management Districts. We're one of 5 water management districts within the state, and we're the light green one up in the Panhandle. Obviously, that's where we are. Right now, we're kind of right smack dab in the middle of our water management district. The other water management districts are Swanee River, St. John's, Southwest Florida, and South Florida water management districts. All of the districts are very different, but they're very similar. They were all created in 1972 as a result of the Florida Water Resources Act. And what that act said was that primarily on the East Coast of the United States, water is managed in a public interest in there. So nobody owns the water. It's for all of us. The state recognized that and said, because of that, we should manage our water and water resources on both a state and a regional basis. So all the water management districts do work together, but we're responsible for our own regional part of that water body. So all water management districts share four primary areas of responsibility. First is water supply. Okay? That's pretty self-explanatory. So we're held responsible to make sure everybody has the water that they need when they turn on their faucets. They want to water their garden, agriculture, and things like that. But it also includes water supply for our natural resources, our natural communities, to make sure that the springs, rivers, wetlands, they have the water that they need, and we don't over allocate resources, which will come back into the minimum flows and levels portion of the talk. We also do quite a bit with flood protection and flood management. So we, again, manage a lot of floodplain areas for a lot of our resources. We do stormwater. We do a lot of those types of projects. Water quality. So we look at what's in the water. A lot of times that's nitrates. That could be fecal coliforms, salinity, different things like that. That is a shared responsibility that we share heavily with DEP. And depending on where you are, a lot of times that jurisdiction will fall more under DEP than it will with us. But we do a lot with water quality. And finally, natural systems. With us being the water management district, we protect not just our aquatic natural systems, but a lot of uplands as well. The uplands are a lot of times where the aquifer is recharged. So that's where that water that comes out of the springs, and in many areas outside of the immediate Bay County area where they get their primary drinking water, comes from groundwater. So managing those uplands where you get that recharge is very important. Okay, now I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to start talking specifically about Econfina Creek and the watershed. So Econfina Creek and the Deer Point Lake watersheds. Econfina Creek feeds into Deer Point Lake. I'm sure everybody is quite familiar with that. That is located within the St. Andrew Bay SWIM watershed. SWIM stands for Surface Water Improvement and Management. That's an effort that started a couple decades ago, something like that. So those are our major watersheds that we have up in the Panhandle. We have 7 of those. This particular SWIM watershed is unique in one really good fashion that makes it much easier to work with, in the fact that it's the only one where the entire watershed is located within the state of Florida. So we don't have to worry about impacts coming from Georgia and Alabama. All of our other major watersheds extend up into those states. And for things like Apalachicola, that can go all the way north of Atlanta and include, the majority of a state. So a lot of it's outside of our jurisdiction. There's a few major tributaries that feature into Econfina Creek and Deer Point Lake. First is Econfina Creek. That's the main one we're going to be talking about. That has a watershed of about 190 square miles. And you can see that on this figure with the kind of light brown outline there. That has an average discharge or flow going into the lake of about 536 cubic feet per second on average. And that's an average flow between 1935 and 2023. Now, when I talk about some of these flow measurements and flow numbers, don't think that if I say something is 160 CFS and another one is 162 CFS, don't think that the 162 is necessarily 2 CFS greater. These numbers are always changing. Flows go up, flows go down, like the drought we're in now. So depending on the period, the day, how long of a record you're looking at, these numbers can vary considerably. So kind of take them with a grain of salt and think about them on an order of magnitude. But we also have Bear Creek, which is 160 cubic feet per second, which John will be talking about in a little bit, which is considerably smaller than Econfina Creek, but it does provide a significant source of water into the Deer Point Lake. And then much smaller than that, we have Cedar Creek and Bayou George, which are between 10 and 15 cubic feet per second of water. So another really interesting feature about particularly the Econfina Creek watershed here And when we're talking about something like the MFLs that I'm going to get to in a few slides, this is absolutely mind-blowing in here. First is that most of the land within this watershed is in a natural land use category. So most of it's not developed. So if you look at the table that we have there on the bottom left, you can see that about 56% of the land use within that watershed is in upland forest. We have another 20% of the watershed, which is in wetlands. About 4% is in open water. So about 80% of the watershed is in a relatively natural condition. Because of that, we have a lot of it, or one of the reasons for that is a lot of the land is in public management. So the district currently manages about 40% of that watershed. All of that 40% that we manage is public recreation areas. So people are more than happy to go out in there, are more than capable of going out there, fishing, canoeing, camping, hiking, whatever that may be. All of those are open to public, and there are quite a few recreation areas there. Now, because we have the watershed has so much natural land use, we also have very minimal water use within this particular watershed. If we look at the 2020 numbers, we see about 1.78 CFS of water, which is about 1.15 million gallons per day, was taken combined out of that entire watershed. Now, 1.15 billion gallons per day may sound like a lot, but when we're talking about how much water is physically taken out of the ground within a watershed, 190 miles, 190 square miles, that's less than a drop in the bucket. That's so small you can't even measure that at the spring. So there's virtually no impact from groundwater pumping within this watershed. And that is very unique for other watersheds, not just within the Panhandle, but really throughout the state. Of that water use, majority of it, about 80%, 85% is for domestic self-supply. So those are private homes where people are, just have a well that they live outside of a service area for public water. They're supplying their, it's not agriculture, it's not industry, things like that.
Yeah, quick question. Why were we asked to conserve water this summer? This spring.
We are right now in a severe drought.
But if it's not affecting, didn't you just say all that we take out does not affect?
So a lot of it is not just for the natural system, but when groundwater levels go down, people may not have the same amount of water available at their well. We don't want people's wells to go dry.
But most of our wells are down 180 feet plus.
Yeah. So we haven't seen a whole lot of impacts from this, but we're trying to stay ahead of it and make sure things don't get worse, is the main reason behind that.
Yeah, we're trying not to put restrictions on people.
I understand.
Put restrictions on
it. If you look at what's being pulled out, and you're saying very little.
Within this particular area.
I would be asked for places like Culligan, the Trumas are pulling it out, following it.
Yeah,
every day.
Everything is voluntary right now. So we're just asking people to be cautious. We don't know how long this is going to last.
But so far, there's no impact that you speak of.
We're seeing low flows in the river in there, very low. And a lot of the surface water streams that we're seeing throughout the entire district are about the lowest we've ever seen them in there. So again, we're trying to make sure everybody's aware of how dry we really are and make sure we don't make things worse than they need to be. But then there are no regulations right now. Everything is voluntary.
Go out as much as they want.
Hypothetically.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to start talking about the springs along Econfina Creek. Those are one of the iconic natural resources that we see along the system. Within Econfina Creek, they're primarily found along what we call the middle Econfina Creek. That's from, you can see the little dots on there from Devil's Hole down to the Gaynor Spring Group in there, or just downstream of State Road 20. There have been 11 identified springs or springs groups. A spring group is a group of springs within a relatively small area that it's really hard to separate out the flows. So within those springs and spring groups, we have more than 36 spring vents identified in there. There are possibly more, and that can change depending on the situation. But most of the springs are found in this area due to that's where a lot of the karst geology is found. If you go through there, you can see a lot of limestone. You can see where the water is coming out. Now, these springs make up a significant portion of flows in Econfina Creek, particularly the further downstream you go. When you're in the upstream portion, it's primarily rainfall in there. Once you get just down of that middle Econfina Creek and into Deer Point Lake, springs make up about 50% of the water that's flowing into Deer Point Lake from Econfina Creek. We also have the other tributaries that are flowing into that we talked about. But springs are a significant portion of the water, not just to Econfina Creek, but to Deer Point Lake as well. This slide has a little bit more information about some of the different springs. So one thing that you're going to hear me mention on one of the next slides is spring magnitude. That is a classification system that was developed, I believe, by the FGS 20, 30 years ago. So a first magnitude spring has an average discharge of more than 100 cubic feet per second. Second magnitude is an order of magnitude less than that, third magnitude, and so on and so forth. And then the Econfina Creek springs we have listed right here, you can see what the spring is, the magnitude, and the long-term average discharge. The ones that I want to point out to right here are the Danner Springs group, which is a first magnitude and is by far the largest spring group within the system. Also Williford Spring and Sylvan Springs. Williford and Sylvan are both second magnitudes and have considerably less water flowing out of them, but they are part of our MFL evaluation, which I'm going to be talking about shortly. Right now. So minimum flows and water levels. This is an evaluation that we completed last year. And what that is it is defined in Florida statute, section 373-.042, as the limit at which further withdrawals will cause significant harm to the water resources or the ecology of the area. So there's a couple important parts about this definition that I want to point out. First is further withdrawals. MFLs are only applicable to consumptive uses. So it's applicable to groundwater pumping, taking water out of the surface, anything like that. If it's not due to pumping or consumptive uses, it is not under the MFL umbrella. So the current drought, that's not MFLs. We can't regulate ourselves out of a drought using MFL tools. And the second is significant harm. That's what we're trying to prevent from the water resources, which could be the public water supply coming out of Deer Point Lake. It could be the coastal wells out on Panama City Beach, or it could be the ecology of the system where we're talking about the Econfina Creek springs, where we want to make sure that enough water is still flowing out of those that we do not significantly harm them. Significant harm has not been defined in Florida statute. But typically what we do across the entire state is we use a 15% reduction in some sort of quantifiable metric as with a significant harm threshold. So it needs to be an adverse effect. Sometimes lower flows are good for certain things. So it has to be an adverse effect with a lower flow. And it cannot change more than, say, 15% of the time, 15% of an area. Depending on the metric, it can look at a lot of different ways. And we typically, in our district, we go with the most limiting metric. So for this particular Econfina metric, or Econfina system, as you'll see in a couple slides, we probably looked at 70 or 80 different metrics. When you talk about, we're just going to talk about what we call the most limiting ones. So the ones that had the lowest allowable flow reduction, and we go with those because we operate under the understanding that if you protect the most sensitive one, you're protecting everything else. So let's say we set an MFL and we're not meeting it right now. Too much water has already been allocated and is being consumed. What do we do? If there's too much water or if it's already not being met currently when we set the MFL, we have to develop something called a prevention strategy. A prevention strategy is basically a document that tells how are we going to get that water back in the system. So it's a list of alternative water supply projects. How are we going to reduce water consumption in one area and spread it out? Are there water conservation efforts that we can do? That type of stuff. If we look at it and we're currently good right now, we're meeting it, but we look at a 20-year planning horizon. So we're meeting it now, but over the next 20 years, we see a lot of areas are growing very fast. So the water consumption right now is going to be very different than it may be in 20 years. If we're projected to not meet that, then we have to do something called a recovery strategy, which is essentially the same thing. How are we going to get that water back into the system and reduce the demand on it? So there's a lot of different water resources that we have in the state. We're a very water-rich state. We're lucky in that regard. How do we decide which water bodies that we're going to do MFLs for? The state gives us a little bit of guidance on that. First, we have to establish MFLs for all first magnitude or outstanding Florida springs. We do not have a choice in that matter. If you remember a couple of slides ago, Gaynor Spring Group, that's a first magnitude spring group. Because of that, we legally had to set an MFL on that water body, even though, as I said, there's very little impact from consumptive uses on there. Otherwise, we may have looked at a different system to study. We also need to consider second magnitude springs. So those are the next smaller down group that are between 10 and 100 cubic feet per second. We need to consider those that are located on state and federal conservation lands. We do not necessarily have to set an MFL on those, but we need to consider those and demonstrate if there is or there's not a need for that MFL. And finally, we can set an MFL on any other water body within the state based upon the importance of that water body and the potential for significant harm to the regional water resources or the ecology. So the water resource itself, that can be the availability of water out on a coastal area. We don't want saltwater intrusion to come there. Or it could be the ecology like we're talking about with Econfina Creek. Yeah.
What was an outstanding Florida spring?
An outstanding Florida spring is a designation by the state of Florida for their, I think you can think of it as like their really iconic springs. So it includes most of the first magnitude springs and some of the really more aesthetic, culturally, historically significant ones.
Good.
But that is a list that's in Florida statute. So the whole MFL process starts off with an MFL priority list and schedule. This is simply a list of water bodies that we've identified that we are either currently studying or we are planning to work on over the next 5 to 10 years, something like that. The table on the bottom left is our current MFL priority list, with one exception. Jackson Blue is not included on there. Jackson Blue Spring has gone effective. We just set that MFL, that rule went effective less than a month ago. So that's now included in the completed MFLs, but it is on our 25-26 MFL priority list. These priority lists are submitted to DEP and approved by DEP every year. So they're regularly updated. Sometimes things change. We have an area that's projected to grow and something changes and the projections change. So water bodies may be removed or a major issue is identified and we need to speed another one up. So items can come on and off of there. And the MFL is a multi-year process. Jackson Blue Spring, we probably spent 10 or 12 years working on that one. It shouldn't have taken that long, but Hurricane Michael kind of hit a reset button on us and literally changed everything overnight. But our current MFL priority list includes one that you guys, our next one that we're working on is the Florida Aquifer in Coastal Bay County. That's primarily over in Panama City Beach. We'll touch on that one. We're still in the fairly early stages of that. The Florida Aquifer and Coastal Plain Region 2, Shoal River, and Morrison Spring. We've completed 4 different MFL rules, 5 different assessments, and these are the different water bodies that we have completed the MFLs for and when the rule went effective. You'll see there's a non-applicable for the Florida Aquifer and Coastal Planning Region 2 because it was determined at the time that regulatory efforts were minimizing the size of the depression that we were seeing from the pumping, and things had slowed down. But we are going to be looking at that again over the next few years, which is why you see it on both of those tables. This is just a map here of where those water bodies are. So I do want to point out that it's basically the same water bodies listed on the 2 tables that you put there, but you might notice that the dates are a year off. Here we're talking about where the technical assessment date is anticipated to be completed. The previous table was where the rule was anticipated to become effective. The assessment is completed about a year before the rule. We then go through a series of public meetings, hearings, reviews, things like that. So typically they're about a year apart. So now we're going to talk specifically about our Middle Econfina Creek MFL, kind of as a case study. As I said, this was completed in 2025. So this is one of our more recent ones. As I said before, we refer to this collectively as the Middle Econfina Creek. Our study area, as we define Middle Econfina Creek for this particular evaluation, was from Williford Spring down to County Road 388. Even though we set the MFL on the creek and we refer to it as Middle Econfina Creek, this effort was focused primarily on 3 different spring groups. The Gainer spring group, which, as I said before, is an outstanding Florida spring, so that's why we had to do this evaluation. That particular spring group has at least 15 known spring vents, but it also have the Williford Springs group and the Sylvan spring group, and these are all within a really close, proximity to one another. So it made sense to look at them collectively as a group rather than try to break it apart with the individual ones. Yeah.
What's the difference between a vent and a boil?
Functionally, they're kind of the same thing. A vent you can think of more as like a cave or a crack in a rock, where you've got the more coarse, whereas a boil might be more, sometimes you'll see it kind of boiling through the sand on there.
Oh.
It's more like that. But functionally, there are point sources where groundwater is coming into the surface water. So one of the first things that we look at with an MFL evaluation is water quality. As I said before, that's one of our main areas of jurisdiction and responsibility. So as you can imagine, in a watershed that's in 80% natural land use categories, 40% public management, we had pretty much no water quality concerns that were there. I've got data here for nitrates. That's just one of the parameters we looked at. We looked at a lot of other ones as well. We saw that the nitrate concentration was well below 0.35 milligrams per liter. That's the state designated numeric nutrient criteria. So that's kind of the line drawn in the sand for a lot of our water bodies. And we're bumping around 0.2, and we don't see any increases or decreases really going on with that. We also don't see any statistical relationships with changes in flow. Some springs, you see increases in flow, you get increases in nitrates. Increases in flow, you get decreases in nitrates. We don't see that here. So that means no matter how much water is flowing out of the springs, we pretty much have the same level of nitrates that are coming out of there. So that gives us a really good assurance that any potential changes in spring flow is not going to change the nitrate or water quality concentrations coming out of the spring beds. So because of this, we didn't really consider water quality much further. A large portion of the metrics that we did develop had to do with the ecology of the system. And luckily for this system, we had a pretty good description of a lot of the species and ecosystems and communities and stuff that are living there. We had 42 fish species documented going back into the 50s. So we had information back before the dam for Deer Point Lake was installed. And we had some more recent stuff. Of the fish species, we didn't have any threatened or endangered species in there. One species that could potentially have been in the area would have been Gulf sturgeon. Now, because we have that dam there, sturgeon cannot get into or out of Econfina Creek anymore. So we didn't have to consider those like we might in some other ones. One of the metrics that we do that you'll see in a little bit is we use fish passage. So that metric is not really, it's kind of designed so like your average largemouth bass in this case can get across a shoal at low water. But it's more of a connectivity metric, really. It's not so much for a bass to get from one pool to the next as it is to make sure that water is flowing continually through the system. We don't get pockets which get really hot, go anoxic, and create fish kills out there. But we do use largemouth bass as kind of the measurement for that depth that we use. They did a bunch of work down in South Florida and found that your average adult largemouth bass needs about 0.6 feet of water to get across a shallow area. So that's the metric that we used for that particular one. We do have grass carp that are in there. Those are invasive exotics. In order to legally introduce those into water bodies, you have to have a permit from FWC. We found a pretty good school of those up there. We contacted FWC and nobody had any permits on record for those. So since they weren't supposed to be there, we did not consider those as far as a metric to protect them for that. We do have a lot of different mussel species in there. So that's something that's kind of unique up here to the Panhandle, is how many mussels we have. Of the mussels that we have, 2 of them are listed as federally endangered. Those are the Gulf moccasin shell, which you can see on the top left there, and the oval pigtoe, which is on the bottom right. The way we look at a lot of these species, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, is we do something called an in-stream habitat model. So we look at the hydrological requirements for those individual species and make sure that those aren't significantly changed. Unfortunately for mussels, kind of pretty much all mussels, but particularly the endangered ones, we don't have a really good idea of the hydrological requirements of those mussels. We don't know how much water depth they need, how much water velocity, where in the channel they might prefer. We don't have that information. Luckily, though, the mussels have a really unique life history trait. They have to have fish to complete their life history. Specifically, they have to have a host fish. So the mussel larvae will attach to a very specific host fish species attached to their gills. They'll spend a portion of their life. They'll grow and mature, and then they'll drop off of the gills, drop down into the substrate, and then the mussels will complete their life cycle there. We got pretty good information of what the fish species and species groups are that the mussels use. And luckily, we do have a good idea of what the hydrologic requirements are for those fish species. So we use those fish as a surrogate for the mussels. So by protecting those fish, then we're using that to protect the mussels. We talked that over with FWC and they fully agreed with that assumption. So that's what we did with that. So we've talked a lot about metrics. We assessed those metrics using primarily 2 different types of models for this particular system. First is a HECRAS model. That's the Hydrologic Engineering Center River Analysis System. That's a really long, fancy word for a model that simulates changes in how deep the river gets and how fast the water flows under different circumstances. It includes parts of the floodplain, the channel, and things like that. So it's a hydraulic model. We created that model all the way from Willowford Spring down to include most of Deer Point Lake, and we assessed that entire area for our metrics. This model was developed and calibrated to post-Michael conditions. So we didn't include any cross sections, anything like that. Pre-Michael, we did include the fish species and stuff we knew was there. We protected those. But as far as the model that we were simulating, everything was representing and simulated post-Michael or real conditions as they are now. And I should mention too, John's going to talk about debris cleaning. The debris within our study area was cleared immediately within the next 6 months following Hurricane Michael. So the areas that he's going to be talking about are upstream and don't have any effect on the MFL that we did. We also use a SEFA model. This is the System for Environmental Flows Analysis model. This is a similar model in that it simulates changes in stage and water velocity, but it does it in a little bit different way. This model operates under the assumption that each species, or what we call a habitat guild, or a group of species that live in a similar habitat, all have optimal habitat. So some fish might like really deep, really fast moving rivers. Others like the shallow areas or really slow moving waters. So they take the best available information, and we have these curves, habitat suitability curves. You can see it here on the bottom for all these different fish species, different species guilds, different life stages of the fish. So juvenile fish might live in different areas than adult fish. They might spawn in a completely different area. So for largemouth bass, we probably have 6 different curves. This will look at changes in river flow or spring flow in this case, and how it affects that optimal habitat for those species in there. So we ended up doing probably 70 or 80 of these analyses alone. The metric that it puts out is what we call weighted usable area. So it's a representation of the amount of habitat. Yeah.
So the in-stream habitat model does not incorporate any sort of habitat fragmentation, right?
No, no.
So it's just based on natural flow.
Yeah.
Models.
Yeah. And it's a representative of kind of a long-term condition over a range of flows in there. I should mention, though, that we are looking at different ways to utilize this model. This model was developed out in the Pacific Northwest, where you have species that are, you might be managing a river for one species like rainbow trout or a salmonid of some sort like that. Those species might have very specific hydrologic requirements. A lot of our species are generalists. If you got a ditch that's wet long enough, you'll start finding some of these fish in there. And you'll also find them in the ecological river. So we're continuously evolving this and figuring out better ways that we can utilize these models. So this is a subset of the results that we have. So these, what you see on the far left where it says metric, that is the metric group in there. So for the top one, it says safe powerboating passage. You'll see one number associated with that. That's the most limiting powerboating passage transect within the entire. We may have 30 or 40 transects, so it might be 30 or 40 different evaluations for that along there. So same thing with the CEFA analysis. This is just one species, one life history stage, one guild that's there. We have numerous other ones that are not depicted on this slide. And the first thing we can see was that we had several metrics where we say the metric was never limiting, meaning that we never saw flows or water levels get low enough to impede that particular metric. So safe canoe kayak passage, that's a depth of 1.5 feet. We never saw water levels get that low in any of our transects throughout the entire system. Similar with the fish passage, we never saw water levels get below 0.6 feet. So obviously you've got the kayak passage, you've got the fish passage. All the other metrics did have some level of sensitivity to that. The most sensitive of all of them was the in-stream habitat, or the CEFA, for the group of fish that was found in shallow, slow-moving water. So that's a lot of your sunfish and those type of species. That had an allowable flow reduction of 51 cubic feet per second. And again, that was for Econfina Creek. So we used all that information to come up with our MFL rule. The MFL rule, if you're interested, is 40A-8.0221, which is the definitions. And the actual MFL rule for Econfina Creek is 40A-8.051. Those are in Florida Administrative Code. The rule became effective June 29th, 2025. We set the MFL at County Road 388, which is USGS Station 235 9500, or Econfina Creek near Bennett. We set that allowable flow reduction from the long-term average flow at that reference gauge. So that's how we're looking at it, using a 30-year moving average, so we can smooth out a lot of those drought periods, flood periods, some of our climatic variations. All district MFL assessments, appendices, documents, everything associated with it is available. You can find it at this link right here. I've got cards here. You can simply grab a card and email me, and I'd be happy to get you anything like that you're interested in. The last slide that I'm going to talk about is our upcoming MFI. This is for the coastal Bay County, Florida aquifer, specifically over in the Panama City Beach over there, where we've got not a huge cone of depression, but we are concerned about potential saltwater intrusion into some of those wells over there. This MFL is ongoing. It's in one of the earlier stages of it. This one will go considerably quicker than the other ones. We're right now working on site access to put a monitoring well out there along Panama City Beach in one of the parks. That's going through the works right now. Data collection and model development have started in there. So we'll, once we get the monitoring well, that'll help give us some calibration data and allow us to assess it moving out forward. The technical assessment is tentatively scheduled for completion in 2028, with the rule tentatively scheduled for completion in 2029, a year later. I say tentatively because we've all seen things happen, particularly during the summer months. We sometimes get some storm systems that have other ideas on our plans, and we have to refocus or rethink what we're doing. And with that, I will sit down and pass it over to John. Yeah.
You mentioned Panama City Beach. How many million gallons per day do they consume?
I do not have that information. I can get that information, but I don't have it with me.
And you also get the split between Deer Point Lake water and well water.
So Deer Point Lake right now is permitted to, I believe, 98 million gallons per day. They don't use anywhere near that.
To go to the beach or for everything.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's everything.
I think that's everything is the 98. Yeah.
98 million gallons.
That's what they're permitted. That they don't use anywhere close to that. Yeah.
And
And I can get you the actual numbers that are
yeah,
used.
I was curious because my life at the beach, sometimes we were on the well water.
Mhm.
We went to Deer Point Lake water at some point. And it's much better, obviously.
Yeah.
But I assume they had gotten most everybody off the well water.
Yeah, I think there might be a few wells out there. There might be
Sure.
landscape irrigation. I'd have to look further into that. I do mainly surface water, and I got the,
Yeah, I
the
understand.
geologists that are working on that
We're
one.
We're some concerned about the aquifer. And where does it go? Do y'all, are you measuring the aquifer volume? Is that what you're keeping track of? Would you show us these? I don't understand cubic feet per second.
Okay, yeah, so cubic feet per second is that's a volume of water.
I understand.
Yeah, that's really easy to use when you're talking about surface water.
Yeah.
You've got a river, how much water is flowing through. When you're talking about an aquifer, now that cubic feet per second that's the water that's being taken out of the aquifer. So they can measure it for the pump. When aquifer MFLs are set, a lot of times it's on an aquifer, a level of water under the ground.
Sure.
It's in there. So it's not going to be, the water surface elevation or the aquifer elevation can't get below X feet.
So
In there.
you measure it per height,
Yeah,
not
essentially.
volume.
Correct. Yeah, that's how that MFL will likely be set.
And our aquifer is fed by what in our watershed? Surely above it.
It depends on which aquifer we're talking about.
Right.
You got the superficial aquifer, which is a lot of your local rainfall. What we're talking about here is the Floridan aquifer. That's the same Floridan aquifer that goes well up into Georgia, South Carolina,
Well,
Alabama.
We mentioned it was completely in our own watershed.
Surface water.
That, yeah, the aquifer did not.
Correct. Yeah, that's a whole nother beast.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll talk to you later.
You sure?
Well, just real quickly, the wells you showed up there, are those wells the district wells you use for a monitoring network, or also using private wells? You can go back to your map of wells. I just couldn't quite. What you just had up there. So that one right there. The dots are the wells, right?
No,
No,
this
that-
is just a potential.
that's-
district surface.
yeah,
That's the groundwater levels that we're seeing from out there. So this line here, this is 20 feet below sea level, 10 feet, 0, 10. Yeah, those aren't actual wells.
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon, guys. I'm John Crow, and I'm also with Water Management and a Bureau Chief. I manage the Bureau of Hydrologic Assessment response and resilience. And what that entails is the assessment part is the field staff that I have, the hydrologic data service team. They go out and do all the water samples. They do the groundwater levels and also do discharge on all of our creeks, rivers in the district. And then the response is we've been a cooperating technical partner with FEMA since 2003. And that what we do is I manage our flood map program. So we're a partner with FEMA and we do the flood mapping for all 16 counties in the panhandle. And then I'm also our emergency coordinating officer. So when we go level 1, when we get a storm coming in, I report to the State Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee since we're local. And we represent all the 4 other water management districts that Paul showed you earlier because we're there locally. And then for resilience, that's kind of a new buzzword in the state, but we've been doing resilience since we've been working with FEMA because anytime we finish a study, we have a resilience meeting and we present flood risk products to the communities to help make their communities more resilient. So with that, though, I'm going to start with storm debris and restoration. You can see here in this photo, that's Econfina Creek. So that was a rough day getting through Econfina Creek. You can just see the sheer number of trees in the creek. But we'll start with Hurricane Michael, which I know you guys are all aware, but that's why we're here for the stormwater debris. It was a Category 5 with max sustained winds of 161 miles per hour. Made landfall October 10th, 2018 near Mexico Beach with a peak storm surge of 9 to 14 feet. So what we saw with that, at least in our waterways, was with just all the trees down blocking the flow in those water bodies was when we get a typical rain event, the stage would come up and it wouldn't go back down and people were being inundated. They were well outside the special flood hazard area. So we knew that those creeks needed to be cleaned up. And like Paul mentioned, we did clean some of those creeks up right after the storm. But at that point, it was $1 million a mile to clean the creeks. And so we ran out of money pretty quick. We cleaned a portion of Econfina, we cleaned a portion of Cibola, and then we ran out of money. And so it sat for a while and the community had some money, but they didn't want to pay for it. They said it was waters of the state. So they held the state's feet to the fire. And eventually we got the money and were able to do some cleanup. But before we got to that point, we had to prove that that was the situation that was going on. So we were given $580,000 by DEP to do some waterway debris assessments and modeling. And we determined that these were our 7 top priorities. And we started that process in 2023, and then we finished it up in February of 2024. And then we started the hydrologic modeling right after that in March, and we finished that up in December of 2024. And so this is just showing some of the assessment for Bear Creek and Bayou George. You can see every triangle is a photo. So we took thousands of photos documenting debris. And I'll give some examples of just, how those photos went. So every time we saw debris, we took a photo and they were geo-referenced. We used the app that had the geo-reference, so we knew exactly where that debris was. And this is just another example of Bayou George Creek. And then this is some examples of the upper Econfina, which was by far the most debris that we saw. No matter of fact.
How far are you on Econfina at that point?
So we actually started at 231 and we went down to Scotch Road. We couldn't get to Scotch Road. It was getting dark. Our shuttle driver had to go through private property to find us to get us out of the creek. So the next day we prepared a little bit better. We launched from Scotch Road and we took sleeping bags and headlamps. We were ready to camp if we had to, but we got to about a mile from our takeout. So we hiked it. We stashed the boats and hiked out by headlamp to our takeout.
But this would be above Scotch Bridge.
No, this is all of it. This is from Scotch Road down to Power Line to Walsingham Park. It's a little mix of all of it. There's some of that that's north of Scotch Road as well. So, yeah, the crews are out there right now, and I'll show some examples coming up. I've got lots of photos in my presentation, so that's why it was so large. We had to send it as a PDF. So after we finished the models, we were able to prove that, we needed to clear these water bodies. And so your representative, Mr. Trumbull, went to the legislature or within the legislature, secured us $10 million And we set aside 7 million of that for waterway debris removal and then 3 million for land debris cleanup and restoration. And the reason we didn't need as much for the land is because right after the storm, for 5 years, we basically had to clean up all of our lands. I mean, we had to clear cut. Trees were everywhere. We had to just clean it up and start over. So we began this process on Bayou George Creek back in September of 2025 with a group called Zulu Marine. They've done great work. They completed that on December 13th of 2025. That 4 miles looks fantastic. And then another group started on October 20th on Bear Creek, and they just finished back in April. And that cost us $2.7 million to do those 2 creeks. And this is just some before pictures of Bayou George Creek. So you can kind of see the before and after there, how well of a job those guys did. And this is just some more with the geo-referenced photography. This is actually all this was done by hand with guys walking down the creek with chainsaws, about 12 guys. And all that debris had to be hauled by hand up to where Bay County, that was their match for the project, was that they hauled and disposed of in their landfills all the debris that we took out. So I don't know if they knew what they were getting themselves into, because I'll show you in a few slides what they did actually haul. But here's just some more before and afters of Bear Creek that you can see here with the bridge. And then on May 5th, after we finished Bear Creek, we actually paddled from 231 down to the boat ramp near the lake, and it's completely clear, beautiful. We had a great trip, saw deer across the creek, a huge owl, about a 4 or 5 foot gator, tons of fish. We were the only ones on the creek. That area doesn't get paddled a lot, so it was kind of nice to be on that. Yes.
One question that happens a lot with restoration. I'm kind of curious if you had what were baseline conditions before the storm? Like if you're trying to restore it, what were you restoring it to? Did you know what was natural?
We didn't know exactly what was natural, because a lot of these areas we hadn't, been on or had documentation of. Until we had the assessment, we really didn't have much to go by. Yeah. So our permits made it where we could only take out, if things were embedded and there was habitat there, we didn't take it out. We left it intact. So we could cut at the water level. But what we did, we got a lot of bang for our buck. So we hit a drought. And then they drew down the lake, which my guys weren't aware of. They got one group finished Bayou George, and they thought they did a great job. And then they drew down the lake, and the finesse group, we call them, came behind them just to clean up anything they didn't get. But when they got to the deeper areas, once they had drawn it down and we were in a drought, they had so much work ahead of them, they couldn't believe it. So we got a lot more debris probably out of that system than we would have if we weren't in a drought.
Gotcha. So your objectives, some navigation interest, or was it ecology?
Mainly for flooding. What we were seeing was those inundation limits outside. They were outside the 100-year flood zone that typically we'd see, that we modeled and mapped.
I'm up off near Bayou George, and I know there's one when you cross over the bridge on John Pitts Road. There's one guy in the floodplain, but it floods. It would flood. His property would flood before we even had Hurricane Michael.
Yeah. We got more reports on Bear Creek with the issue.
I don't know Bear Creek like Bayou George Creek.
Yeah. But I know when Josie was still at the county, I know she lives on Bayou George, and she was letting us know some areas that needed cleanup. So the county helped us prioritize what we should clean up. So anyway, move forward. So here we go. So this is what the county got to haul. So in 2025, they did 137 loads at almost 600 tons. And in 2026, they did 166 loads at 627 tons for a total of 303 loads, equaling 1,226 tons, which I looked it up, and that would be about hauling 300 plus elephants out of those 2 waterways. So a lot of debris. I don't know if they were expecting to have that many loads. So we then shifted to Econfina Creek, and we started that process at Scotts Road on March 2nd, 2026, again with Zulu Marine. And they're actually almost to the power line, but that finesse crew that comes in behind them, because a lot of times when they go through, there's still a lot of dead trees out there that fall in, and they cut a lot of that, but they'll go back and get that stuff. So the finesse crew will come back in. So this is when the project has to be done, June 30th. And so they'll be finishing that section. And then there's another crew that just started on power line down to Walsingham, and they started on April 12th, and then they'll finish June 30th. And this total cost for this section of 12 miles is $4 million. Which, if we were to do it back right after the storm, would have been $12 million. So I'm just going to go through some quick before and afters just to kind of show you the progress that these guys have made. So you can see, I mean, the transformation is really, really good. I mean, some of these areas, I mean, you just can't get through these areas. And for safety too, for recreation, when these levels get up, I mean, I can speak to it. I mean, we were almost trapped a few times in our kayaks trying to do the assessment. And it's, when you deal with trees and current, it's not a good thing.
Portage is the common thing in that Upper Creek.
Yeah.
Even before my.
Well, yeah, I mean, naturally trees are going to fall in that section. So, I mean, once we're out of there, I mean, there's still going to be trees. At one point there was a canoe 7 feet above us on trees. I mean, somebody had bailed out of their canoe and it went downstream. And when the levels were high, that's where it stayed. So actually we took it out and floated it downstream. But anyway, we worked with another group called Southern Disaster Response, and they did the section from Walsingham Park down to Williford Spring. Now that section was cleaned before, but the two companies that were doing it one was coming from downstream, one from upstream, and they were supposed to meet in the middle. Apparently they didn't make that middle before they ran out of time and money. So that section set kind of unpassable. So we, at a lower cost of $744,000, we brought this group out, and they did a pretty quick job. It took them about a month to get that section clean, and it looks great now, because we went out and paddled it on April 23rd. We paddled from Walsingham Park all the way actually down to our Econfina field office, and it's the water levels were low, but it's everything's passable, and it's a really nice paddle. And I know a lot of people are excited because we put it on Facebook, and it's probably been our most liked Facebook post we've ever had at the Water Management District. And I think that's because the paddle companies got a hold of it and passed it around. But these are just some more pictures.
So at this point, you can put in at Walsingham Park and go all the way down to 380 without portaging.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shift into recreation real quick. The district, we have over 80 recreation areas throughout the Panhandle, and we'll focus more on Econfina Creek because that's what we're here to talk about today. And Econfina Creek, as you guys are probably well aware, has some great paddling and camping. We have horse trails that are out there. The Florida Trail runs through that section. And for camping, all of our campsites, they're primitive, but they're all free, and you can reserve them online. You just have to go in and reserve them. We also offer special programs and tours, educational site visits, hunting and fishing opportunities, and that goes into one of the neatest things that we do. We do this every year. We do an Operation Outdoor Freedom. It's a fishing event and a hunting event for disabled vets, and we set up our field office. We bring in a bunk trailer, and we also set up some of the offices like a camp style for fish camp, hunt camp style for people to stay on site, and we treat them to a great time. We do a fish fry, we do steak night, we do sorry, maybe this is my train of thought right. They do a low country boil on the last night, and they just have a great time, and our staff enjoys putting that together every year. I'm going to shift into land management and reforestation. This isn't my area of expertise. The guy that was supposed to be here couldn't make it, but I'll get through it. This just shows our land ownership throughout the Panhandle. Our west region, we have about 62,000 acres. In our central region, which we're in here, we have almost 103,000 acres. And of that, you can see here, Paul showed a graphic earlier that really tied that in. We've got in Econfina Creek, there's almost 42,000 acres. And then our east region, we've got about 47,000 acres. And when we go in for restoration, we were doing this prior to Michael, but this is kind of the same process. We try to get that longleaf pine wiregrass communities for the sandhills that was there in the past. And so if we have these dense pine plantations, we'll kind of take those out, harvest the timber, and then we come back in and replant the longleaf and get the wiregrass community. And we try to burn those on a regular basis to kind of create this evolution that you see here. And something that we're really proud of, back in 2023, we planted our 20th millionth longleaf. And we had a ribbon cutting, and it was a special event for that process. And then a couple remaining slides here of just kind of some finished areas once we get done and complete that process. That's it. Any questions?
Comment, in the '60s, before the dam was built.
Mhm.
A lot of that lower area was estuarine. We had white shrimp, good habitat for them, and they like a lot of fresh water. But when the county decided to build the dam, they had to go do a study about what was best for our drinking water. And at that time in the '60s, as we do remember, we had already begun to have a lot of aquatic weed issues in these shallow lake systems, as we mentioned grass carp. And a study was done out of Tampa or St. Pete. And it basically came up and said, do not build a dam. We could control at that time the prediction of the water needs. Could be done with some low-level dams coming down Econfina before it hit that area there at Bear Creek. And the lower Bear Creek comes into upper. And but the study said no, if we have lower maintenance issues, which we won't, and not the aquatic treatment of plants, we need to step up higher in the watershed and protect the watershed as you guys are doing.
Yeah, we own a good portion of the recharge area.
But I can't find that study anymore.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that
So I
study.
don't know if there was any ecological work done for that area.
I know FSU did a salinity model of North Bay and St. Andrew Bay system.
I found some fish data. Yeah, sometimes you find that data in weird places, so it might have been, but it was around that time. But we can look into it.
Yeah, when I
See.
came to town, one of the old realtors was one of the engineers that did the study, Tampa. And he liked this area so much doing the study, he moved up and retired. And he was basically a realtor at that time. And but he was telling me about who had the study, and I assumed the county had it. But when I went to the county looking for it, found an old fellow that knew about it, but he couldn't put his hands on it. The county's bad about purging data.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's before weed.
Oh, yeah, no.
That's barn somewhere.
That was before water management district.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Before match, but a lot of institutional knowledge tracks when y'all were created, y'all brought back the previous before controls. We still had some controls. It wasn't water management district, but it's watershed people.
Yeah, well, having Deer Point Lake, I mean, we don't have a ton of surface waters. I mean, it's from groundwater, but yeah, most of our water supply is surface water in the Panhandle for sure.
Yeah. But in your data, you have how many. Your model, it shows how much million gallons per day comes out of your 4 or 5 springs that you had, 5 springs or whatever it was. And that relative is feeding the creek more consistently than we are like this latest drought. Are we over the drought yet? I got about 4 inches of rain at my house and I was happy to get it.
Well, the D4 has creeped over farther to the east, but yeah, I mean, we're still in drought conditions.
Okay.
Yeah. And what worries us is we're not even into, I mean, you guys know, I mean, as soon as Memorial Day hits,
Oh, yeah.
it's game on until July 4th. And then it's, even we see the water surge of this whole area during those times. When the kids get out of school and people start vacation, I mean, the water use goes way up.
Yeah.
I mean, the county is under a requirement to design a new water treatment plant because they hit 80% use in the summer months for the past few years.
Yeah.
So they're currently doing that.
Well, that's according to the old engineer, he also said that would resolve the saltwater intrusion. Dam gets topped over by a surge from a hurricane. Salt water gets into it, and the paper mill couldn't operate with
Brackish.
any salt.
Yeah.
Remember, I don't know, y'all know those.
My dad was in the paper business for 30
Yeah,
plus
yeah,
years.
you know,
I know
the-
paper business pretty
the salt
well.
water-
That's why I'm in this field. I'm on the other side.
The salt water got into the Deer Point Lake, which it would on occasion.
Yeah.
Quite problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those gates on that system.
Yeah,
Through the
no,
upstream.
that's good because that's what it's all about. But they predicted that. And that's why I said you need to control it further up north.
Are there any other questions from anyone online before we wrap up? So you can drop it in the chat or raise your hand.
And feel free to reach out to us through email or phone. Any subsequent questions.
Yeah, I have my cards here as well.
Yeah, both have cards.
Anyone else?
Well, anyway, we've been down years and years down all the way from Scott Bridge, Scott Road,
Oh, it's beautiful.
all the way down to Deer Point.
Yeah.
Good fun.
I mean, when I did it, it wasn't a lot of fun, but
Oh, no.
it was a challenge. But I mean, we did have fun with it, because we felt like we accomplished something. It was just two of us.
And I don't know if it's because of the old landfill, but South George does not get a lot of navigation traffic. We get a lot of duck hunters. So as far as canoe, none of the outfitters tried to.
We saw some folks coming out. I guess they lived on it. They were paddling it when we were clearing it. They were pretty excited about it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much
Thank
for
you so
joining us
much.
for all your information. It's very informative. Don't forget, if you have any suggestions on topics for the fall, please let us know where you go.
Yeah.